everyone. Welcome back to the last session of the day. It gives me great pleasure to have John Bertrand from Digital Diagnostics here with me today. We'll be talking about in the trenches of commercialization within AI. So John, welcome. Before we sort of get started, it's probably a good idea for our audience to have an overview of who you are and what Digital Diagnostics is. So yeah, if you could just give us a brief intro, that would be fantastic.
Sure. Thanks for the intro, Becky. Well, my name is John Bertrand. I'm the CEO of Digital Diagnostics. Here at Digital Diagnostics, we focus on bringing AI paired with specialty sensors into primary care. What we really do in just kind of layman's terms is we remove the physician oversight from frontline care diagnostics. Our first use case being diabetic retinopathy, the leading cause of blindness in the US and around the world. What we've done is we've taken an off-the-shelf fundus camera, otherwise using an eye care specialist, did a pre-registered clinical trial for our AI, essentially got that approved to go to market with no physician oversight. Once you do that, these specialty sensors like this fundus camera can then be placed in any convenient access point around healthcare, whether that's your GP, primary care, or even your local pharmacy. Again, removing the need for the physician really allows you to open up access to this specialty care patients otherwise are struggling to receive.
Fantastic. And I mean, you mentioned there that obviously, patients are struggling to receive care around, certain avenues. What do you see as the biggest challenges around sort of commercializing AI within healthcare?
Sure. I think the biggest issue right now is around business model. There's a lag in most healthcare, if not all healthcare systems around the world, between getting the science and the tools approved from an FDA certification perspective and getting reimbursement. That tends to create what's commonly called like the valley of death of like healthcare innovation. You end up spending 2 to 4 years, depending on the regulatory pathway you're working through, trying to establish direct reimbursement for your technology, oftentimes running into regulations that are written over the last 75 years with only a physician considered as the clinical decision maker or the person involved in that particular workflow. So something as simple as the physician diagnosis or the physician diagnosis for eye care just being written with the word physician in it in a piece of CMS regulation in the US is enough to delay you for 2 years on figuring out how you're going to make money.
Wow.
What it's done, unfortunately, in my opinion, is it skews a lot of us that are working in this space towards the life science area where you can get pharma or a bioscience to pay you directly for some type of research. Well, that's not necessarily like bad work to be doing. It's really delaying and preventing access for a lot of patients on the actual care side, where there's a lot more value to be delivered over time.
Yeah, completely. And I mean, do you see it becoming easier to create sort of business models that drive commercialization over time, or do you think this is it for the foreseeable?
I think it's going to be a longer path than all of us on the technology, innovation, and research side would like it to be. But you have seen some noteworthy changes here, even within the last 12 months. So for example, in the United States, CMS gave our AI a CPT code or a billing code to submit to payers or the government to be paid. First of its kind, never been done before. There's now an understanding, at least here at our company and within CMS, how you could do it. In addition, they've just set a reimbursement rate here for us in several regions of the US. Commercial payers are now starting to pay us for it. So there's starting to be kind of the nascent early adopter kind of phase beginning to develop, probably 2 years away from kind of full market understanding and probably 3 from a repeatable process at scale. But we're starting to see people move that way. In addition, some commercial payers or governments in certain regions of the world see enough value or have an acute enough of a problem, or they're willing to just say pay direct like a software license, which is kind of unique and different and has its own challenges, but tends to be a little bit of a faster process. So we are seeing some development in that space. The one thing that I think will still be a challenge is that knowledge is heavily compartmentalized within small segments or groups around the world healthcare economy. So getting that out to a very large industry across the world is still going to be a challenge here. And I talked to the gentleman in Israel yesterday who hadn't even begun to ponder it and was like, where do I go for that information? I'm like, well, I can help you a little bit because we've done it before, but there's not really like a central understanding or a big body of consultants that widely get it, like they do for more traditional, say, med device or pharmaceuticals.
And so then, I mean, would that be your ideal, to have sort of one pool of sort of, data that everyone can dip into, and obviously, free flow of ideas? I mean, maybe that's something that's a pipe dream, but what would be your ideal then in terms of everyone?
Clearly stated rules of the road where there's an understanding how to do that. We've spent a lot of our energy, specifically in the US and a few countries in Asia, working with the regulators to say, look, you've given us the one-time approval. Can we work with you to kind of publish how we did it and to make sure that it is widely understood? Now, that's self-serving to an extent, right? We're going to make more products or partner with other people to bring more products to market. We want the documentation there so that if there's any change in decision makers, we're not starting from scratch. It's like, look, here's the rule book. We're following the rule book per your guidelines. But I think that also then starts shining a light for others on, okay, this is how we would bring it to market from a commercial perspective, business model perspective, specifically if we wanted to go that route. So starting to see that, again, it's going to take time. There's also, I think, going to be a phase we'll go through where we'll want to step back and measure patient outcome. So we paid for it. Did we get the value back we thought we would? Let's gut check that and then revise any of these rules of the road that are now just beginning to get published. I mean, the FDA just published for the first time in January the fact that they're going to be producing rules of the road within the next few months. So, we're really on the leading edge of this right now.
Amazing. And I mean, obviously, 2020, 2021, stressful times for everyone, but at the same time, huge innovations coming out of, obviously technology. AI to many is still classed as a new technology, I guess. So, I mean, how do you see startups looking to commercialize, and interacting with larger vendors? Because you've got a new technology combined with, startups. It's exciting, but difficult, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest issues is you have different risk profiles. You view the world differently. In a startup, if I'm not taking risks or moving at 1,000 miles an hour, I'm not doing my job and my position. And the same for most leaders in startups. In larger healthcare vendors, med tech, pharmaceuticals, even provider orgs, you're incentivized to be cautious and to be very leery of risk, which anything that's new or innovative is risk. So you have a little bit of a conflict there. So some of it is just finding the groups around the world that see that they have to go this way, or if they get there first, they get a massive competitive advantage. So some of that is partner selection. The other is just what I've learned is really making sure when you're partnering with somebody, you're not creating an innovator's dilemma for them. It depends a little bit on what you're making, but some of the best partners for distribution are excited to work with you in your technology, but then as they get into it, 6 months into the discussion, starting to like operationalize a partnership, we're like, wait a second, if we bring in automation or if we bring in this new innovative tool, we are fundamentally challenging our existing client base in the way that they traditionally deliver care. So you have to also, if you're going to start working with the vendors, work upstream with the other constituents around the table to make sure they're bought into this movement you're trying to create of where the care is or where the automation is going to go in. If you end up in a scenario, as we've done before, where, hey, let's move this specialty sensor out of the traditional eye care space into primary care, and eye care in a particular region of the world isn't ready for that, it's going to make this larger partner for distribution kind of put the brakes on kind of halfway through the process and say, wait a second, we're worried we're going to cannibalize our own business and not replace it with enough value add that in the long run, this is a good move for us. So it's something I think you need to do as a startup right now. I also think the large companies are not set up in a way that incentivizes taking risks. They kind of have to work with them, but both parties have to sit down and have a very sober conversation at the beginning of how are we going to make sure if we have a conflict with different constituents, how are we going to move them over time? What are expectations we both should have that are reasonable and how fast this is going to go? And what's the commitment level at the top in the long run to doing this, right? Because it reminds me of like books you'll read about the chip industry in the 70s and 80s, right? As one group went towards the small chips, the other stayed in their current kind of large 8.5-inch floppy disk space. At a certain point, the large groups have to decide whether they're going to do like a skunkworks play, partner with a small vendor such as like ourselves or others, or they're just going to kind of let things in terms of market erode underneath them over time. So you really got to paint that picture at the high level, make sure they understand, like, there's a decision to be made. Which one of these three paths do you want to take?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of talk at the moment as well of, patient-centric approaches, as it should be, within
Mhm.
healthcare, within life sciences. You spoke about vendors there, are they ready for the commercialization of AI? I mean, do we think patients are ready for AI? Or, I mean, do you think they even care? As long as they, obviously, if it works, great.
There was a really great study that just came out of the UK last week, where it was like 60% of those over 65 would prefer digital health solutions versus going in person to their GP, which I was shocked about. That's not what you'd expect, because that age bracket, I've been in healthcare for 15 years. That age bracket is usually the laggard group. It's just natural from a demographics perspective, nothing specific to this generation. But I was just shocked at the percentage of people that were ready for it. I think the biggest thing that I've learned is, it's cool and sexy to talk about AI with investors. That's what gets them excited. It's cool and sexy to talk about it with large vendors with distribution to an extent. But when you're talking about it to the patient, your value prop needs a breakdown of what matters to them. For us, look, it's not about AI. It's about the fact that you can go to your local pharmacy and get your diabetic eye exam, which only 15% of people in the US get each year, which is shocking, because 80% of people that have diabetes end up with this condition that robs them of their vision. So you're
Wow.
sitting here going, it's in your best interest, but let's talk about why it matters to you. Again, it's in that retail pharmacy. I can give you a diagnosis instantaneously, and we can get you set up with a referral same day to have the treatment done. None of that talked about AI. None of that talked about technology. It's about what matters to you. I can make this convenient. We can make sure you have a next step immediately, and we can make sure we save your vision, something that, from the surveys, we know you fear more than losing your foot. So it's all about speaking to each stakeholder and what's most valuable to them. Too often I hear people talk to patients about AI, and that's scary, but let's talk about the benefits and the value add for the individual there.
100%. I mean, and coming back to that case study that you mentioned, I'm in London at the moment. I mean, and as you say, that demographic is a surprising demographic, probably. I
Mhm.
mean, without bringing it in, back to everything, back to COVID. I mean, do you think that is something because of what's happened in the last year, that they're suddenly all of they're saying, do you know what, anything that means that we perhaps don't have to have that interaction is of a benefit that perhaps they previously wouldn't have done, um, or perhaps everyone's just embracing AI, which is fantastic.
Um, I think it's probably a mix. Let's be honest here, right? Like, if you're in a risk group, it's not exciting to have to go to the physician right now. My wife has an autoimmune disorder. She's not pumped to leave the house right now, and that's totally understandable to me. And same for 65 and older. Um, I do think this is a trend that's been going on for some time. Prior to working in this space, I was an executive at an EMR company, and I remember watching the statistics for patients by demographic segment get excited about interacting with their provider and patient data through patient portals move from 5, 10, 15, 30% up over the last, that was from 2006-ish to like 2014. You really saw this upward trend. I think this has been going on for a while, and some of it is, the age out process. People are aging into the 65 bracket that used to be in the 55 and up or the 45 and up as time progresses. And they're just a little bit more used to technology, say, than those that were 65, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
For example, like my 85-year-old grandparents use FaceTime to talk with me, and
Love
FaceTime their physician right now. And that's not something they would have been cool with even 10 or 15 years ago. So it's the age brackets kind of shifting from
Yeah.
generation to generation. And I think some of it too is just, it's pervasive. It's really helpful that everything has a camera in it now. I think that's part of it. People are like used to interacting like this. Using your phone to give you quick results for commercial things outside of healthcare is now something that everybody understands in most age brackets, if not all. So I think some of it is just a general trend in that direction.
Yeah, perfect. And we're almost out of time, but I guess one big macro question for you before we go. I mean, what do you see as being the future? I mean, some might say AI is the future, but what is the future within AI, I guess?
I really think AI is more of a triage and automation tool than it is as replacing like the physician or the human element of care. Too often I hear people that are heavy in the tech be like, you won't need to go to your doctor anymore, or you'll never go to a hospital. And I don't really see that as a realistic outcome here with the technology, even though it has a lot of promise in the next several years. What I see it doing more is offloading repetitive, narrow tasks that we've already mastered from a kind of known healthcare pathway. So our test is a great example. Why would you go get a DR test done by an ophthalmologist when there's a well-known grading scale and source of truth as to whether you do or do not have the disease? You're kind of wasting the physician's time. You're wasting the patient's time. There's a lot of cost involved with that. That's a great use case for AI. And what it does is it turns the provider more into a patient coach and someone that manages holistic health. So I think that's more of what we should expect as an outcome out of the promise of AI, rather than saying we're never going to go to a doctor anymore, or it's fundamentally going to alter the need for human interaction. If anything, it's going to more focus and enhance it on what matters to you as an individual, the emotional aspects of managing your care, and the education that all of us need in making sure we're taking ownership of our own health as a patient.
Amazing. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, John, for that, very brief look into, AI and, the commercialization of it. It's, that's fantastic. I do encourage everyone to reach out to John, to find out more about what's going on, as well as obviously all of the other fantastic speakers that, we've had with us today. So that's our last session for today. I hope to see you back here again tomorrow. And, once again, thank you, John. And I'll see you again tomorrow. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much. Bye.